I'm going to talk about Wheel by Yuri from Doki Doki Literature Club because that's my favorite poem in the whole game. I think the poetry in the game is like surprisingly really strong as a whole, but this one is my favorite. I think about this poem a lot. I'm a creative writing major, by the way. I know a little bit about, some things. I don't claim to be an expert by any means. Structure of the poem. So it is a prose poem, which just means it's not split into lines. It doesn't have stanzas. It's just one paragraph. And I think that was a great choice when it comes to this poem. So I was looking for the poem, I just Googled to find it because I didn't want to open the game to find it. And someone had posted it and had broken it into their own lines and stanzas. And I was like, no. Like, you really shouldn't do that. With any piece of art, you shouldn't alter it before you post it at all. I would say especially with poetry, because in poetry, it's such a condensed form that every single choice is so important. I think the person said it seemed like it should be in stanzas, and I couldn't disagree more. So, hey, it's me from a different day, but that's not important. Basically, I just realized that I explained this part pretty poorly, so I'm just gonna cut in and say it better now. So, essentially, the first reason why I think it works better as a prose poem. This poem is not interested in making you comfortable. The aim of the poem is actually to make you uncomfortable. So, when this person said it felt like it should be in stanzas, that feeling of wanting to organize it, that's part of the poem. That feeling of wanting it to have more structure and be organized more logically and make more sense, that's what the poem is aiming for. By splitting it up into more easier bite-sized pieces, you're taking something away from it. Secondly, the poem has a lot of periods in it anyway, and by cutting it up into lines, it slows the poem down too much. Because you already have a lot of pauses because of the periods, and if you split it into lines and stanzas, it's too slow. And the last reason is, the poem is called Wheel, and not that I'm trying to claim in any way that it's a shape poem, a poem that's like trying to look like something, because it's not that, but visually, a paragraph looks more like a wheel than the poem would look if it was split into lines and stanzas. Also, in a poem where it's kind of about everything being connected and coming back around, it makes more sense for everything to be smushed together in one paragraph than it does for it to be separated out. That's why I think the structure of this poem is perfect the way that it is. Okay, thanks. Go back to other me. The other thing I notice about the poem as a whole is that the entire poem is made up of sentence fragments. But I think what's particularly interesting is that they are all subjects. Some of them sound like verbs. Some of them are like turning an axle, grinding, falling sky. So they sound like verbs, but if you think about it, those are more descriptors rather than actual actions. Or they stand alone as a subject like grinding. It just makes more sense to think grinding and then the rest of the sentence would be like, I don't know, grinding is fun or something like that. Or turning an axle is my favorite activity on a Friday night. The reason I think that is so interesting and it works so well and is so powerful is because it makes the poem have a lot of potential energy. It really pushes you through the poem. It's like a rotating wheel does what? Turning an axle is what? Grinding what? Even though there's a lot of pauses and it's really, really cut up, you're still moving through it really fast because there's all that potential energy of where is the sentence going and you never get an answer. I think that ties into a bigger theme of the poem, because it's really getting into all of these philosophical, metaphysical kind of ideas. And I think what the repetition of only subjects does is kind of saying that there is no end to the sentence. You never get to know. No one gets to know. Where, like, if you think of it as, like, I think this poem is quite nihilistic as a whole. And I think kind of the point of it is that there is no meaning to find. There is no end to the sentence. There is... So you could say that any one of these subjects could be like life itself. Just life. And then there's nothing after it. It doesn't... Kind of saying like there's no afterlife. It's just life and then nothing. There's no continuation. There's no... Nothing is going anywhere. If that makes sense. But I don't think I have a better way to explain it. I think I'm gonna have to leave it there. Now getting into actually words. So it starts with a rotating wheel. I think it's really important to pay attention to the word wheel. Obviously because it's the title of the poem. It's also where the poem starts and where the poem ends. It ties into the whole notion that, you know, all these sentences are starting but they're not going anywhere and they're not ending. So there's a sense of something that is infinite and never ending, but also completely stationary. A rotating wheel, just a wheel that's spinning and not moving forward, just like all these sentences. That also comes into play with the shuffling of the words. You get introduced to these words and then they just kind of get shuffled up and regurgitated, like bold head, ship, portal, snakes, God, blood, holy stakes, human eyes. You know, all those things are getting shuffled throughout the poem. And it just goes into the wheel is spinning, but it's not moving forward. So it's both infinite and confined, which is a very, like, compelling energy. Also, I think it would be a dumb idea to examine this poem in a vacuum, like, not in relation to the game at all, as in Doki Doki Literature Club. Because to me, a lot of this seems to be referencing the game. So a portal to another world. I think that is the game. A thin rope tied to a thick rope. I think the thick rope is reality, as in the world that you and I live in. And then the thin rope is the game. So it's still real, but less so. And its meaning is tied to the existence of actual reality, the world we live in. Because if we're not here to interpret the meaning of the game has no meaning. So its meaningful existence is tied to actual reality. A torn harness, I think, would be referencing Monica, because she is supposed to be bound by the rules of the game. She is supposed to be a being without consciousness. She is not supposed to have a will of her own. But the harness is torn, and she kind of is following her own will. Swimming with open water in all directions, followed by drowning. I just love this poem so much. So, swimming with open water in all directions, to me, signifies freedom. Signifies the, like, kind of freedom you have as being an autonomous living being with the ability to think and reason, which is what Monica is almost getting into. She's dipping her toe in that water, so to speak, and then followed by drowning. I think that points to the fact that true freedom does not exist. Because, like, swimming with open water in all directions sounds free, but then you realize that you can't get out of the water. Even as a free person, you are bound by so many things. You're bound by your circumstances, the nature of reality, your own DNA. Like, it's not true freedom. And also, with this freedom, but not quite true freedom, comes pain, comes drowning, comes death. That is the price you pay for swimming with open water in all directions, which is living. The price you pay for that is pain and death. A prayer written in blood makes me think, there's this book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. There's a quote from it that's like, real gods require blood. If you want something from a god, you have to pay for it. Not asking for it passively, just, no, you have to sacrifice something. Snakes with human eyes is interesting because eyes have a lot of... that sounds so dumb. I was gonna say eyes have a lot of significance, and I'm like, yeah, obviously they do. But what I mean by that is they have a lot of, like, literary, metaphorical, philosophical, like, that kind of significance. Because they are associated with knowledge and truth and enlightenment. Our eyes really separate humans from other animals because our eyesight is actually very good compared to other animals. Obviously there's, exceptions to that. We use our eyesight a lot more than a lot of other animals do, and that's one of the big reasons why our brains evolved to be so large, is so that we could process all the information we're getting through our very good eyes. So you could argue that the evolution of our eyesight to be so good is the reason that we're able to think in all of these enlightened and metaphysical and philosophical ways, because that's what made our brain so big. So, eyes is very significant. I am not sure about this. I do not get it from a reliable source, but I think it's interesting. If you know, whether this is true or not, leave it in the comments below. Feel free to correct me on any of my biology or evolutionary, because like I said, I'm a creative writing major, and that means that I don't know anything. But anyway, I have heard that the reason human eyesight evolved to be so good was so that we could see snakes, because they were a very big danger to us. It's interesting to think of the thing that gave us, allegedly, the thing that caused us to evolve our human eyes. It's interesting to think of that with our eyes, the snake with human eyes. I think it's also interesting to think about how we can metaphorically describe humans as snakes. That guy's a snake, but we never metaphorically describe snakes as human. And this is a way of flipping that. And obviously snakes have a negative connotation. I don't like to think of snakes that way because I think they're adorable and sweet and I really like them. But it'd be dumb to ignore that they do have a negative connotation. So that's probably how it should be read in this context. Then a thread connecting all living human eyes. I think living is an interesting distinction because there's this idea that human life somehow continues after death. And I think that's what this is referencing here by emphasizing only living human eyes. So, the thing that you could argue that makes us human, our eyesight, as in our ability to amass knowledge and think about things, reason, and all that, arguably the thing that makes us human does not continue after death. It is disconnected, and the thread only connects human eyes that are living. This is a point I'm going to come back to later too, but it also ties into the idea that of knowledge as a living thing, because our knowledge changes over time. That's an idea that this alludes to as well. And also, the thread connecting all living human eyes, to me, suggests how all human beings are connected. We like to think about how unique we are, but in reality, all of our lives kind of follow the same structure, and we are all a lot more similar than some of us like to think. Exponential gearbox, the word exponential kind of ties in to the theme of this poem of something infinite, but also confined. So, exponential gearbox. God disproving the existence of God. It's so good. So, I read this in two ways. The first one is, I'll go with the one that's simpler, the one that relates to the game. So, in the game, you could consider Monica a god because she has all this control over the reality of the game. So she's a god. And then you could also consider the player a god because they can do things like go in and delete Monica's character file. So basically, by deleting Monica's file, is God, the player, disproving the existence of a weaker god, Monica. I also think about it in the idea of God disproves the existence of God. So by that I mean, essentially, the idea is that God is both all-powerful and benevolent, and simply the idea of that is not possible because there is so much senseless pain that is happening literally right now. So either God can't do anything to stop all the senseless pain that's happening, so he's still benevolent but is not all-powerful, or God is all-powerful and could stop the needless suffering but chooses not to. In that case, he's all-powerful but not benevolent. There's also other things. The idea of an all-powerful being kind of disproves itself because it goes into the idea of, can God make a stone that he can't move? Or also get into, if God is a perfect being, he does not need anything, therefore why would he do anything? Why would he create anything? And he certainly wouldn't need for you to love him. A clock that ticks 1 second for every rotation of the planet. So, one rotation of the planet is 1 day. But in this case, it's equivocating 1 day to 1 second. I think it's in conversation with the whole time is relative thing. So time is something that we measure mathematically and kind of factually, but it's also something that we experience. It's also subjective. I don't know, like after the day is done, it feels like it started a second ago. And that goes into the whole thing of life moves very fast. It's very short. A clock that ticks 40 times every time it ticks every second time. So that would be an infinite cycle. That would so quickly launch into infinity. Like I've said, infinity is a recurring theme in this poem. And obviously I'm not touching on every single phrase in this, just the ones that really pop out to me. Blood written in clocks. So you can think about blood in a literal sense, but you can also think about blood as in the phrase, it's in my blood, as in it is in your nature, or it is a family trait in your DNA. So blood written in clocks is pointing to, and clocks as in time, and time running out, and being affected by time. So blood written in clocks is like, it's representing the short nature of human life, and how it is in our nature to grow old and die, and that is in our DNA. Then at the end you have this repetition of breathing followed by all the nouns that have preceded this section of the poem. This serves as the poem's climax, because the repetition of breathing and also the phrases are shorter, and it's coming shorter. The word breathing, it's like saying all of these things are alive. They have a life of their own, and therefore they are subject to all of the kind of rules that have been set up by the rest of the poem. I think breathing God is specifically interesting because it's saying God is alive, therefore God is temporary, and God suffers because as has been set up, and there is no meaning to God, because like I said before, this poem is pretty nihilistic, and the rules set up by the rest of the poem are that to live means you are temporary, you suffer, and have no meaning. That is what life means. Breathing time is also specifically interesting. It goes back to this whole idea of something being infinite and also contained. So breathing time, time is also alive, therefore time is temporary, and one day time will end as well. And breathing human eyes, like I said a while ago, this is going to be a long video, a theme that I brought up before is how knowledge, represented here by human eyes, how knowledge is alive and changing. It ends on breathing wheel. I think that's also touching on how life is cyclical, whether it be like the food chain or like how human beings kind of all live by a certain structure. You know, we're born and then we live for this many amount of years and we typically do these things or experience these things at certain times, and all living creatures kind of have those life cycles that we can document. All life kind of cycles into each other, and you know, everything's a cycle. There's like the friggin' water cycle, planets rotating or circling around the sun, or because of the force of gravity, all planets naturally arrange themselves in a circular shape. Just things like that. I think that's the end of all my specific things. I think this poem is absolutely incredible. There's so much meaning to unpack from it. I know a lot of people just kind of think it's kind of nonsense or random or, you know, just a bunch of stuff thrown together, but I think so much of it is very deliberate and very deeply meaningful. There's so much to get from it. So this stretched out to like I don't know, I've been filming for like an hour, so not gonna get into any more of the game's poems this time, but I might do another video analyzing some more. So, yeah, that's gonna do it. Catch you later.